Hello, my name is Roisin and welcome back to Roisin's Reading and my Vlogmas. So today I thought I would rank all of the historical fiction that I have read in 2021. Now, this is not actually all of the historical fiction that I've read in 2021 because I am reading the Goodreads Choice shortlist at the moment. In fact, that's these books here, and I am not going to rank them in this video because this video is going out before that vlog. I think the vlog should be out tomorrow if I get my reading done, but I don't want to spoil the vlog for you, so I'm not going to rank those ones. And obviously we're not finished December yet, so who knows, I could squeeze some more historical fiction in before the end of the year, but I love doing these tier ranking videos, so I thought it would be fun to do so now. So we have 46 books to get through. Some of these obviously I read back in January and some of them I read last month. Did I read any last month? No, I didn't. I think October's the most recent time I've read them. My memory of these may not be as good as it should be, but here we go. We're going to go straight in with the tier ranking. Now, let's just see if I can remember how to screen record. Okay, so here we have my tier ranking list. Now, I did do a tier ranking of the books I'd read up until the 6-point mark in the year, back in June. So these books I have already tier ranked among themselves, but there are the new additions and my thoughts may have changed. But I will leave that in the cards above. Then what I've named the ranks or whatever is slightly different this time because I couldn't remember and I wasn't going to go and watch that video again. Top rank is Hilary Mantel level. Now, if you've been watching me for a while, you will know that Wolf Hall, the Wolf Hall trilogy, the Thomas Cromwell trilogy, whatever you want to call them, they are some of my favourite books. Probably my favourite books, definitely the books that I talk about the most and compare everything to. So, a little unfair, but that is why that is being put at the top. If I think it's as good as Hilary Mantel, then obviously I'm in love with this book. Next is Solid. Now, I know Solid might seem like it just means fine, but to me Solid is like a pretty good book. It is doing good things with the writing, with the characters, with the story, with the things that it's saying. Everything is working out for me. There's nothing like, not one of those 4 pillars is collapsed. Then number 3 is Enjoyable. Now I put this one in because there are some reads in here that I have enjoyed, but they're not perfect reads, or they're not reads that I would compare to some of my other books, but I had a good time while reading them. Then we have Needs Work. Now these are books that I could see kind of what they were going for, but something is not working for me. It's not a book that I could recommend wholeheartedly, but it might work for other people. And the final one is Made Me Actually Angry, and this is reserved for books that pissed me off in some way. I don't know how many of these books pissed me off, but I'm sure there will be some, and we will get to them when we get to them. The first one on here is A Lady Cyclist's Guide to Kashgar. Now, there's going to be a lot of linking in here in this video, if I can remember, because lots of these I read in blogs, but A Lady Cyclist's Guide to Kashgar I read when I was reading books that the Storygraph recommended to me. I think that probably I would have put it in Enjoyable, but it's become entirely forgettable. I don't really remember caring about anything or thinking anything of it, so I think I'm gonna have to drop that one down to Needs Work. I don't think it works for me personally, and it was fine. It was like a Sunday afternoon film kind of book, a grandma's book club kind of a book, but it didn't really work for me. Next we have Net for Small Fishes by Lucy Jargo. Now, this one could go in Needs Work because, again, I didn't really like it. This one is set in the Jacobean court, and I actually might put this in Made Me Actually Angry because Jacobean court intrigue, I was so excited. This was like in my anticipated releases. It was one of the books that I was most excited for this year, and it was really not good. The historical detail wasn't great. The characters were very melodramatic. There was like random, really violent sexual violence scenes that I did not appreciate the way that they were done, but I don't think it was done actually in an actively harmful way. I just didn't appreciate the way they were done. I think it probably should just go in Needs Work because it wasn't that bad. Okay, now we have an actual Hilary Mantel novel, A Place of Greater Safety, which is her big chunky tome about the French Revolution. Now, the writing of this was obviously Hilary Mantel level good. However, there was a little bit in the middle where the pacing kind of dropped, and I don't know if it's because I know slightly more about the Tudor court than I do about the French Revolution, and so maybe I missed like the sense of foreboding. So I'm going to put this one in Solid, I think. The characters were so good, and it's really funny. Registry of My Passage Upon the Earth. Now this one I really liked. I think I'm going to put that one in Solid as well. That was a collection of short stories, and Daniel Mason did a really good job of differentiating each of the stories, writing them in the style of the time period that they were based in. They were kind of had this sort of magical, fantastical fairy tale element to them, which I love. A Room Made of Leaves by Kate Grenville. I think I'm going to put this one in solid or enjoyable. It's somewhere between these two. I think I'm going to put it in enjoyable for now, although that feels, I think the only reason I'm hesitant to put it in enjoyable is because that feels unfair, because enjoyable feels like it's for frivolous reads, and this wasn't a frivolous read at all. It's about a woman, a real life woman, who was one of the first settlers in Sydney with her husband, who's a horrible abusive man, and their relationship with the Indigenous Australian people. And I'm just not entirely sure how I feel about the representation in this, and I am not an expert by any stretch of the imagination. Like, I read some books by Aboriginal, Maori and Torres Strait Islander authors this year, but I haven't read enough and I don't know enough. So I'm sure Kate Grenville actually knows more than I do. But I'm still, I don't know, I felt a bit uncomfortable with its portrayal of this woman as kind of still a hero, even though she's like an early settler. But the writing was beautiful, and maybe I don't know, I feel like I need more perspective on that to be sure. And then we have A Single Thread by Tracy Chapman, not Tracy Chapman, she's not got a fast car, Tracy Chevalier. I'm going to put this one in needs work, you know. I think a part of that is because of the hype and the anticipation. A lot of the people I watch on BookTube are big fans of this book. I thought it was fairly boring. Again, the way it dealt with violence against women and compared it to the Holocaust, I thought was a bit, yeah, I wasn't sure that quite, this like privileged middle class woman who gets followed in a field once is as bad as the Holocaust. The sense of impending threat, I think, was more what it was about. But anyway, it just felt odd. Yeah, I didn't think the writing was particularly good either, just fine, but not the best. And then we have Burial Rites by Hannah Kent. This one I'm definitely going to put in solid. This one is set in Iceland. I love that kind of remote, chilly feel. It really got the vibe of the historical period right, which I really enjoy. And yeah, I think it was a good, solid story. Very slow moving, unreliable narrative stuff going on. Thought it was lovely. I didn't fall in love with it the way I'd hoped to, but I definitely think it's a solid book. Now, Ben Hopkins' Cathedral. This is going to be my first Hilary Mantel level good book. I loved this book, and I was really surprised by how much I loved this book. A lot of people have been comparing it to Pillars of the Earth because it's about the building of a cathedral in medieval Europe. Pillars of the Earth is Salisbury Cathedral, and Cathedral is, oh, why can't I remember the name? It's in Germany. So they have been compared, and they also follow a big cast of characters all around this building of the cathedral. I haven't read Pillars of the Earth, but I have read Ken Follett, and he cannot write like Ben Hopkins. The writing of this book is just stunning. It's so beautiful. The way all the characters' perspectives are differentiated is wonderful. The voice, I just love it so much. The humour, the darkness, the perspectives. We have women's perspectives, we have Jewish people's perspectives, the growth of the church and the perspectives of like pogroms that are going on, piracy, everything, like all this like political, economic, religious history. Wonderful, absolutely wonderful. So dense, so beautiful. I love that book. Now we have Crow Court by Andy Chalmers, and I'm going to put this one in solid. I feel like I should actually tell you about them before I start dropping them in the place, but yeah. This was a good kind of murder mystery historical fiction, but the mystery is very slowly unravelled, like over the course of decades, but it's so well done. Each chapter is from a different perspective of a person who was in this small town around the time of the murder, or meets someone who was in this small town around the time of, well, a disappearance that I think, do we then realise it's a murder? I'm pretty sure it says murder on the back, so I'm not ruining anything. But each one is told from a different perspective. And you go into each one thinking, okay, now I understand what's going on. And then something happens and it completely flips. And again, the thing that I like about this is that the different perspectives are all really well differentiated. It 100% feels like an early Victorian novel. It's wonderful. It's so charming. I love the way that it talks about, again, class and first industrialization, when people get replaced by robots. I can't remember what that's called. The coming of the robots. The first time that happened, and the way that affected farm workers. It's so brilliant, but so still smoothly, casually woven in. We follow a lot of different stratas. Yeah, brilliant. Brilliantly done. Sebastian Barry, Days Without End. I'm going to put this one also up in solid. This one I was unsure how I felt about a little bit white saviour. It's about this Irish boy who goes to America during the famine after loads of people have died, and he ends up in America and he ends up signing up for the Union Army. I believe they're in the Union Army, but he's like, I'm on this side and I'm fighting another boy from Limerick on the other, in the Confederate Army, because they've just got all these poor Irish people who fled a famine to fight for them. And it was not something I didn't know about the history of America. I don't know very much about the Civil War, and this was a really interesting perspective. Really harrowing, really beautifully written, incredibly beautifully written. One of the most beautifully written books that I have read all year. But yeah, there is this, I believe she's Sioux, Native American girl, who this guy rescues after his army massacre all of her people, and they take her to be their child, her and his partner, his boyfriend. Yeah, so there's a queer element to this as well. So it's a very interesting look at history and very beautifully written, but I'm just a little uncomfortable with that portrayal. And I know that he wrote another book, because he's written a lot of books about this family from the perspective of that girl. Again, I don't know how I feel. Do you want to start a scandal? This is gonna be the first one that actually made me angry. So I last year read a fair few Regency romances by Tessa Dare, and this one is also by Tessa Dare, and I enjoyed most of them, thought they were fun, had a good time reading them. This one though, Do You Want to Start a Scandal, fills every like toxic romance novel trope that you've ever heard of, like possessive, controlling man does terrible things to woman and it proves how much he loves her. And the heroine was like spunky and cool. I quite enjoyed her, but the terrible things that he does and just gets forgiven for, and the way she compares it to things that she would do in her life, it just seems ridiculous. And I really can't be doing with any of those tropes. So I've also kind of tired myself out of Regency romance, and I think that was the last one I read, and I read that in February. So yeah, it's not really my comfort read anymore, not my go-to. That one might have been the reason, might have broken me. Next we have Great Circle by Maggie Shipstead. Now this I read when I was reading the Booker Prize shortlist, which I'll leave in the cards above, and I had a rant about this because it was my most disappointing read of the Booker Prize shortlist, and yet I'm still saying it is a solid novel. And that might seem weird. I think I still rated it 4 stars on Storygraph. With all my heart, 80% of this novel, I loved it, and I really didn't like 20%. So this is the story of Marion Graves, who is a pilot, and it tells the story from before her birth in the early 20th century through living with her father in a Montana, living with her uncle and her brother in a Montana wilderness during Depression, becoming a pilot, marrying a man, like marrying a bootlegger, her whole life. That part of it was so wonderful, beautifully written, absolutely gorgeous, gripping, wonderful characters. Just my favourite, really one of my favourites would be Hilary Mantel level, that part of it. Really badly let down by the 20% of it that was in the modern time period, told from the perspective of this vapid, self-obsessed actress talking about these pseudo deep points. Oh, she drove me up the wall, and the whole section just felt redundant and annoying. So it really brought this one down for me. So maybe I'll reread it and just skip her parts, because I don't care. I really don't care. We have House of Stone by Nobuo Rosa Tsushima, and I think I'm going to put this one in Hilary Mantel level, you know. This is set in Zimbabwe. Tsushima is a Zimbabwean author, and is about this boy that weaves his way into a family's life, and then their boy goes missing, and he kind of uncovers their history about what happened to them during when Zimbabwe was Northern Rhodesia, and when Mugabe came to power, and what happened to them during that time. It is a really, really difficult, harrowing read. One of the darkest books that I have read all year. Really incredibly dark book. So beautifully written, so complicated in terms of the narrators, in terms of morality. It really shows you what people will do to survive, and the way people tell themselves stories, the stories of a nation. It's just so incredibly well written, and I loved it so much. Really one of my favourite books that I've read this year. And then we have Cartolin Street by Magda Szabo. Now I don't know whether to put this one in solid or Hilary Mantel. I think I'm going to put it right at the top of solid. This one is set in Hungary. It's been translated from the Hungarian, and it is about 3 families who live on the same street at the start of the Second World War, and the family who live in the middle are Jewish. And it's told from the perspective of the children, so they kind of don't understand really what's going on. But it's also set further forward in time when Hungary is under Soviet occupation, air of secrecy and informing on one another, and they live in this one building, and they are haunted by the ghost of the Jewish daughter. And yeah, it's wonderful, so wonderfully written, so moving and distanced. These characters kind of reminded me of Milan Kundera, possibly just because it's a similar time period. But yeah, I really enjoyed that one. I read it when I was reading Women in Translation. Then we have Nervous Conditions by Tsitsi Dangarembga, and I think I'm going to put this one in solid as well. I really enjoyed this book. This is set in Zimbabwe as well, because that one and House of Stone I read when I was reading books from Southern Africa, which I will leave linked in the cards above if there's room. Nervous Conditions is just the story of a young girl who is coming of age in Zimbabwe when it is Rhodesia apartheid, I guess, that's going on at the time, and the two levels of citizenship and what it's like to be a black girl growing up in a colonial African country. Really wonderfully written, really, the characters feel so real and closely connected. I really enjoyed that one. Of Women in Salt by Gabriela Garcia Marquez. Gabriela Garcia, I keep putting Marquez on the end, but of Women in Salt. And I put that one in Made Me Actually Angry because it is not a historical fiction novel, and like, that's not the fault of the book. I didn't enjoy the book. I thought it was fairly boring. I thought all the characters were navel-gazing and not that interesting. But also, I'd been told that it would be about Cuba in an historical fiction novel about Cuba with sections told from that perspective. There are 2 short chapters about Cuba in a historical time period. The entire rest of the book is Florida in 2014. It's not a historical fiction novel. Please stop labeling books with slight bits of history as historical fiction. I don't like it. Then we have Reputation by Lex Croucher. I'm gonna put this one in needs work. Like, I read it for an enjoyable read, but I found that it was not thoroughly researched enough. There was a lot of anachronisms, and if those anachronisms had just been the references to pop culture, maybe I could have forgiven them more, but there were other bits that I was just like, why would they say that? That doesn't make any sense. So yeah, and also it was very melodramatic. It was very much a YA book, which is not my genre anyway, so that's why I think this could work for someone else, but not for me. It wasn't as enjoyable as I had hoped it would be. Then we have Say Yes to the Marquess by Tessa Dare. Now that one I'm going to put in enjoyable, and it is what the section enjoyable was made for. It's just a fun Regency romance that I enjoyed. It wasn't my favourite out of the Regency romances by Tessa Dare that I've read. It was probably in the lower half, but it was still enjoyable. It wasn't as bad as the other one that's on here. Then we have Segu by Maurice Condé. I'm going to put this one in solid as well. Solid seems to be my biggest category. This is about Mali, Segu, which is a kingdom that was in Mali during the 17th and 18th century, and it is about the 4 sons of this important guy in Segu, his 4 sons, and the ways that they get dispersed across the world during first contact and then slavery with not even first contact, but contact with and slavery from white Europeans. And so one becomes a Christian missionary, I think. One becomes a Muslim and goes to Morocco. One gets enslaved and ends up in Brazil. One ends up in London, but not enslaved. He just ends up traveling to London. That might be the Christian one. I'm forgetting, and that's one of the things with this book. It is so big and sprawling and epic. The reason I wouldn't put it in Hilary Mantel level is that the writing wasn't my favourite. It wasn't the best writing, but translation. This was originally in French, so how much of that can I blame on the translation? Sometimes it had this like cool dreamlike quality, sometimes it had this cool folkloric style, sometimes I thought it was just a bit plain and also a bit confusing because everybody, when they change their identity, gets a new name, and I couldn't remember who everyone was, and the guy, their father, is a polygamist, so they will have different mums, and I couldn't remember whose mum was who, because one was like a servant girl and one was his first wife and it was more important, so I couldn't remember the statuses of everyone. Found that hard to get my head around, but that's a me problem, not a book problem. She Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan. I'm going to put that in enjoyable too. This is kind of a fantasy historical fiction about China during the rise of the Ming Dynasty, I believe, but with a fantasy element, about a girl who takes over her brother's life, grabs hold of that and ends up in a monastery and then fighting the Mongols. And yeah, it was just enjoyable. Some very sexual, really sexual. I don't really need to read another fisting scene. Interesting, enjoyable. Yeah, I quite enjoyed it. It reminded me of Lord of the Rings or something like that. Not quite that, but like it had that kind of epic history, traveling around going to places, doing battles, battle tactics. How do we get around this battle kind of a thing going on. Sparks Like Stars by Nadia Hashimi. Now, this is another one that I didn't really think of as historical fiction, but it is set during a 1970s coup in Afghanistan, so it is definitely historical fiction. It's just that it's 2 time periods, and the time period that's modern day about this girl who escaped to America after that coup because her father had been involved in the monarchy, and she ends up in America, and then we see her wanting to go back after 9/11 back to Afghanistan. It is a historical fiction novel, but that second narrative becomes more present than the first narrative. I think I'm going to pop this one in enjoyable as well. Like, it could do with a little work, but I think it kind of worked for what it was. It wasn't the best writing, it was fairly plain. Again, Grandma's book group, I think they would love Sparks Like Stars. Now, The Betrayals by Bridget Collins. I'm going to put this one in Made Me Actually Angry for 2 reasons. One, because there was queer baiting in it that I was upset with the way that it ended. And 2, because Bridget Collins has recently been revealed to be transphobic, and that kind of explains that annoying plot twist that I really didn't like. So yeah, that one made me actually angry, and I think that Bridget Collins might be not just transphobic, but queerphobic in general, and I'm putting that one in Made Me Angry. Let's move on. The Crimson Petal and the White by Michelle Faber. Solid, very good at the time period, very good at making you feel the setting. Little unnecessarily long. If you're going to give me a vague ending, please edit your book. The Dead Wander in the Desert by Roland Saizenbayev is going up in Hilary Mantel level good. Another excellent historical fiction. This one is about Kazakhstan. Roland Saizenbayev is a Kazakhstani author, and this is about Kazakhstan during the Soviet occupation and a big lake, massive interior lake that they call the sea. The Soviets start to block up the rivers further up to irrigate fields, and the sea becomes saltier and saltier, and the people who live around the edge of the sea lose their livelihoods. And there's also a nuclear testing thing that's causing people to have deformities and things, lots of birth defects, and also people who've come back from the Second World War because Russia used Kazakhstan kind of as cannon fodder. So there's a lot going on. It's a big epic book, kind of gives me, now I've not read this or seen the film, but just from the vibes, Dr. Zhivago vibes. It's wonderful, so well written, very masculine. There's not a lot of women in this book or perspectives of women, but it has this kind of, well, there's a really big oral tradition in Kazakhstan because there's a lot of nomadic peoples in Kazakhstan, and it has that oral storytelling vibe to it, and I really love that. Elements of folklore, elements that feel, I think magical realism would be a way you could describe this, because it is political, absurd, and it does a little bit remind me of 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez as well, which I guess could have been on here as historical fiction, kind of is fantasy at the same time, isn't it? So yeah, I really enjoyed that one. Then we have The Death of Comrade President by Alain Mabato, and that one's going in solid as well. A novel from the Republic of the Congo. I think it's the Republic of the Congo. Sorry, I should probably look that up. But it is set during another coup, and it's set over the course of 3 days, told from the perspective of an 11-year-old boy. Quite long-winded and quite a difficult read to like focus on. There's not very much plot or anything, but it's very funny. There's a lot of repetition, dark as well, like funny but also really dark. The ending, my god, that ending packs a punch. Then we have this one, which is The Eagle of the Ninth by Rosemary Sutcliffe. I'm not gonna look that up, I can't be bothered, sorry. This one I read when I was reading the best historical fiction, the UK's favourite historical fiction, which I'll leave in the cards above. Again, enjoyable. It's a children's novel about Roman Britain, kind of adventurous, kind of an interesting, quite well written, but yeah, again, no women in it, and the one woman is kind of a prize at the end, but enjoyable. I enjoyed it. The Fortune Men by Nadifa Mohammed is again solid. So I read that one again when I was reading the Booker Prize shortlist, set in Cardiff during the 1950s, about a Somali man who lives in Cardiff and has been falsely accused of the murder of a Jewish shop-owning woman. And I enjoyed it. I did enjoy it. I liked the claustrophobia. My favourite parts were the parts where we would get someone's background, our main character's background whilst he travelled down from Somalia through to Kenya, through East Africa, or the perspective of one of his friends who's called Berlin because he was in Berlin at one point and he was part of a human circus in Berlin. That was really well written, and I feel like when she went that way it got broader and more interesting, and then when you got back into Cardiff it got a bit more closed down and really claustrophobic. And I know that that was part of the feeling of this whole small town watching you, this small community who knows who you are. I liked it, but I didn't love it, and I can't really give you any concrete reasons why. It just didn't 100% work for me. Then we have The Game of Kings by Dorothy Dunnett, which I'm going to put right at the top of solid, I think. It would be Hilary Mantel level good, except she wrote like she was Walter Scott, and sometimes things were in French, and sometimes there were reams of poetry and I didn't understand what was going on. But really fun read, really enjoyable read. Like, it could go in enjoyable, but it's better than an enjoyable novel because the writing's wonderful, the characters so wonderful. There is one character in here who I still think about regularly when I read this back in May. Then we have The Giver of Stars by Jojo Moyes. This one's going to go in Made Me Actually Angry. This was about Depression era travelling pack horse library. All of the stereotypes and tropes you could possibly imagine. Just not interesting. Just not interesting. Then we have The Illness Lesson by Claire Beams. This one is about a Victorian school based on the Transcendentalists, and they're schooling this group of girls, trying to mould their minds, and they start to get sick, and there are these red birds, and the girls start to get various different sicknesses. There's a doctor called in. Very dark, very gothic. And we're told from the perspective of the daughter of the guy who runs this school, who also starts to get sick. As you would expect from a Victorian novel about female sickness, it gets very dark. Goes in exactly the direction you would expect from that synopsis. But I really enjoyed the writing. I thought it was lovely. Not perfect. There were some times it went a little too far, I think. But I did enjoy it. Then we have The Intoxicating Mr. Lavelle, which I'm going to put in enjoyable. Because, again, this one was kind of a romp. It's about two boys from a kind of middle-class family who go on a grand tour of Europe. Their parents kind of trained them to get in with the good crowd so that they could end up working their way up in society. One of the brothers is really there for it, and the other brother is kind of unsure that he wants this life, and he meets Mr. Lavelle, who he instantly is attracted to, and kind of pulls him away from the trajectory he's been set on. Very melodrama, dramatic, rompy, fun, queer, historical. Felt like it was written of the time, that kind of 18th century melodrama feel to it. Yeah, I enjoyed it. I didn't think it was anything special, but I enjoyed it. The Old Drift by Namwali Sabel. Now this one's going to have to go in Hilary Mantel level good. When I was reading the books for Southern Africa, I didn't put The Old Drift as high as House of Stone in terms of how I felt about them, but since The Old Drift is the one that's really stuck with me. It's over the course of over 100 years of Zambian history and on into the future, kind of techno-futurism. Covers so many things and it's so brilliantly written. I've said it before, but if you like Zadie Smith, I think you'd like this. Lots of conversations, lots of great characters, very funny, kind of surreal and weird, also a bit magical realist, I would say. Yeah, loved that book. It's one of my favourite books of the year, so definitely, that's a spoiler, but definitely going in Hilary Mantel level good. I guess this whole video is a spoiler. Parahaka Woman. Now this was one of the books I read when I was reading Maori and Aboriginal writers, and this is by a Maori author, whose name I cannot remember. I'm sorry, I'm being terrible with names. This one I'm going to put in needs work. The writer, this is about a woman from Parahaka, which was a free Maori settlement where were constantly being encroached on by the British settlers, and the men ended up being taken to prison, and this woman's husband was one of them, and she kind of goes on a journey to try and save her husband. The writing was just not good. The writing was just really flat. The story itself very interesting, but the writing felt like a history textbook, and I just didn't love that. I wish it had been written with more heart and more developed characters. The Philosopher's Flight by Tom Miller. I'm going to put this one in enjoyable, although actually I think it's solid. It's one of my most enjoyable books of the year. Like, I enjoyed it more than any of those in enjoyable. But it is like a fun historical fantasy about witches, but it also does interesting like political narrative and really, really greatly developed characters. The Prophets by Robert Jones Jr. I'm going to put this right at the top of solid again. A really great book, really beautifully written, but just a smidge overwritten, just a smidge. Very poetic and beautifully written. The characters, stunning. The relationships, stunning. It's about two enslaved boys who fall in love, their time on this plantation, and each of the chapters is told from a different perspective. Love the way that it did that. I loved some of the characters. the sort of older female enslaved woman. I can't remember her name, but her character was brilliant. Like the way that it got you inside the heads of the people who were enslaving people and made you feel really gross, to be perfectly honest. Justifying things to themselves without it justifying it to you. Like, I've read some enslaved... It's like the Kate Grenville thing, where it's like, I feel odd that you're making this character so sympathetic. Robert Jones Jr. does not make them sympathetic, but he makes you understand how they can make them understand themselves. It's a very delicate balancing act, and he does it really well. And all of the characters are wonderful and, yeah, beautiful. Really well. Really beautifully written, but a tad over much sometimes. The Raging Quiet I read for a book group. Didn't make me angry. Well, it did make me a bit angry in its treatment of disabled people as infantilizing disabled people, making an able person rescue a disabled person. Also just really badly written, but it's early 2000s YA. Like, that's not my vibe at all. The Salt Roads by Nalo Hopkinson, again at the top end of solid here. This is about 3 women over the course of time, who 2 of whom are enslaved, one of whom is she's the mistress of Charles Baudelaire, and she's mixed race, so she doesn't have as many rights. But yeah, it's really wonderfully written. Sometimes I got a little confused, sometimes it didn't feel right up my street, but for the most part I really enjoyed it. Now, my camera battery is starting to flash, so I'm going to go through the rest of these quite quickly. So we have The Shape of Darkness by Laura Purcell. That one I'm putting in enjoyable. It is a gothic horror ghost story set in Bath, with a twist at the end which made it much more enjoyable. I didn't find it creepy enough though. I wanted more horror. Then we have The Wonder by Emma Donoghue. I actually might put this one in needs work because I thought that the writing didn't stand up to the Emma Donoghue I've read before. Enjoyable, but just not that well done, about a girl who says she's not eating in Ireland, and I just felt like it got overly convoluted. Then we have Chinua Achebe, Things Fall Apart. Hard to tell from that cover, but that's what that is. That is Hilary Mantel level. I mean, that's a Chinua Achebe level. Brilliant classic. It really stands up to what it says, packs a lot into such a short novel. Those Who Are Loved by Victoria Hislop made me actually angry, terrible, really badly written, overdone dialogue. Really did not enjoy that one at all. Tidelands by Philippa Gregory. Enjoyable. Far more enjoyable than I thought it was, for all of the slander that I thought it would be. For all of the slander that Philippa Gregory gets, she knows how to write an atmospheric novel and the way to write about people in a historical time period. She brings the historical time period alive, which, as I'm reading these books, I realise is a thing that not everyone can do. However, she does not get characters that have motivations that make any sense, and everything happens with real speed in the plot. There's like all this atmosphere and then suddenly something happens, and it's not a very balanced or well-paced book. Tipping the Velvet needs work, honestly. Didn't make me angry, made me disappointed because it was my first Sarah Waters and I really hoped I would love Sarah Waters. Melodramatic, overlong, and all of the other things that I've been saying. Characters were great. Historical time period, yes, it did feel like that, so maybe I'll move it up to enjoyable, but it didn't have the weight, the writing style wasn't my favourite. Till by Daniel Kelman. This one can go up to Hilary Mantel level good. I have talked about this book so much, I've raved about it. Really brilliant, dark, folklore style story of the 30 Years' War in Germany. In the point of view of this trickster character, you have witch trials, you have creepy woods, you have battle scenes, brilliant, sardonic, darkly funny humour, wonderfully written. Love that book. Sir Walter Scott needs work. Sorry, Sir Walter Scott. That's Waverley, by the way. You are a classic. This is a classic, and you are one of the most famous historical fiction writers of history. And you basically founded the genre. But you need to stop going off in tangents. Stop putting in Latin because I don't understand it, and I don't want to look to the bloody notes. And develop your women characters. Stop them being prizes at the end, and yeah, have a plot rather than just some tangents you wanted to go on. And then finally we have When a Scot Ties the Knot. Enjoyable. More enjoyable than Say Yes to the Dress. Just another one of those Regency romances I read. Say Yes to the Marquis. More enjoyable than that one. Out of the 3 on here, the most enjoyable. I have raced through those last ones because it's still flashing red. But that is where I am at. Those are the books that I read, the historical fiction I've read in 2021, and how I feel about them. We have 6 Hilary Mantel level good books, which is great because I didn't feel like my reading this year has been as enjoyable as my reading last year. Solid is my biggest one by a long stretch, then enjoyable, then needs work, then Hilary Mantel level good, made me actually angry. Same level, so basically my 1 star and my 5 stars, I've got as many as each other, but my 4 stars is the most common, which is good. That means that I'm reading good, if not great books, most of the time. Oh, sorry, I'm just going so fast because of that, but I hope you enjoyed this video. Please remember to give it a thumbs up if you liked it, to subscribe. I'm putting out new videos 4 days a week until Christmas, so I will be back again tomorrow, hopefully having read these books, and I will see you very soon. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.